What's up, everyone? This is Raphael Garcia back again for another week of the MMA Ratings podcast. I am flying solo today because my coworker Roy Billington, he actually was at UFC Fight Night Dublin, and I believe he is traveling to go back home from that event. So it is just me today, sitting and chatting about the world of MMA. So we have a lot to go over. There was two fight cards last week. There's a pretty big card this weekend, and there's also some other big stories that are coming from the world of MMA this week. Most of it straight out of the UFC. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at uh, on Twitter at rgarcia two underscores sports. That's RGARCIA two underscores in sports. That's the best way to get in contact with us as we talk about the world of MMA. So let's jump right in. So the first thing we're going to talk about this Sunday is we're going to look at the UFC Fight Night, the Dublin card that was held last night, Saturday night, or Saturday afternoon, I should say, because it was around 3 o'clock when it was on the East Coast. So we're going to start there um, to discuss what we saw last night, and of course, know the big story coming out of the event was Conor McGregor, and he was a story going into the event to begin with. Almost overshadowed even the UFC card that was going on Wednesday, but we'll get into that later. So he finished Diego Brandao in the first round of their fight. And the first thing that stands out, are the questions of whether or not this was a really strong test for him. I had already said it wasn't. I was kind of looking forward to the fight with Cole Miller more than I was looking forward to this fight, but Cole's injury kept him off the card. So was I surprised with what Conor did? No, not at all. He finished the Brazilian in a little over 4 minutes, which is what he should have done. He is on an 11 fight win streak at this time, so he is doing what he needs to do to keep the hype train going. Everyone seems to be they're on either side when it comes to talking about Conor. Either they love him and they love all the pub he's getting, or they really hate him and they can't stand anything that's being said about him because truth the truth is in the numbers. He hasn't really defeated an opponent that's within the top 15 at featherweight at this time. So all that hype around him, getting a title shot or even being in a consideration is a little bit far fetched, but it's still interesting to have because he's doing exactly what fighters at this point in time should be doing. Everyone calls it like the Chael Sonnen, I guess, strategy of how to make yourself famous in MMA, and Conor McGregor is really doing it at he's doing it in a way that proves that it works. I mean, how many times have we seen guys with just two wins in the UFC get a event headlined and build around them? How often does Dana White really even talk about guys that are on a two fight win streak? He really doesn't. I mean, heck, Jim Miller, who we'll talk about later, at one time was on a 7 fight win streak and he couldn't even get a title shot at all. So it really comes into play with what Conor is doing with the way he hypes up his fights and the way he talks about his opponents and the way he talks about himself. We see that it really helps. So while he hasn't been challenged when it comes to the opponents he's faced, he's definitely doing what he needs to do to make himself into a star. Now all the UFC needs to do is continue promoting him, which they've shown that they have, and they have the opportunity to build someone into a name, which is at this point in time, they're really suffering when it comes to just the uh, just the amount of people who are interested in some of the stars that they have fighting now. I don't know what the gate numbers were and gate and attendance numbers were from this event on Saturday, but I definitely will go back and see because I think it was just something that was is worth capturing and see just how much of a star Conor McGregor really is at this point in time and what's next for him. So just continuing on that conversation, just thinking what is next for the Irish native. I think that I like the fight with Dustin Poirier. I feel like they've already done a good job talking about that fight. Both guys are already coming at each other through social media networks. I think there's already been some quotes about one another. Um, I found one interesting last night when Poirier was asked about Conor McGregor, I think back in April, and he made the play that he didn't even know who Conor was, that he was surprised that he was fighting in the UFC. And McGregor responded last night saying that he knows that Dustin doesn't really want to fight him. So I think that that's one good fight that they could take for him going forward. The other, though, I believe I would like to see is Charles Oliveira. I feel like Charles has really grown in the featherweight division. I mean, he's only been beaten by like the best guys that he's faced. He's been beaten by Cerrone, he's been beaten by Jim Miller, Cub Swanson, and Frankie Edgar. Like those are four of the best guys that the sport has in the lighter weight classes, regardless of what group, and maybe even across the sport in general. So those four losses shouldn't be, a big knock against him. I think he would be a great test for Conor. He's aggressive on the feet. He's very long. He's like probably one of the tallest featherweights around available. I don't know. His wrestling isn't that great, but his ground game is definitely one of the best in the sport. I personally believe we've seen him hit some very creative submission skills. So I think that would be a great fight for Conor. If he blows through Charles, maybe then you can list him in the top 15 and then start giving him some bigger name opponents there. But that's something I would like to see as maybe like a main card opener for like a UFC event on Fox or something like that. Give him a big enough platform where he can continue to promote himself, but you don't put all of your chips invested into him right now. So if they gave this fight like a main card, or excuse me, like a main card opener for a UFC Fox card held during football season, which is when they saw their biggest ratings numbers last year. I think that would be a definite good way to introduce Conor to more like the mainstream fan base outside of just like the hardcores that are always talking about him. I think that that's the best way to go with him going forward. But there's a lot of talks about him getting thrown in there with Cub Swanson, getting thrown in there with Chad Mendez. I think that's a little bit too much. I think both of those guys beat him. I think Ricardo Lamas, I think he beats him as well too. Even Nick Lentz, I was having a conversation about him. I think that's another good fight because Lentz has that wrestling skill that everyone wants to see Conor tested against because we've all seen wrestlers completely destroy other fighters' hype trains. So Nicholas has that ability, but he's wilted against great strikers in the past too. So that gives Conor some room to be able to work there. So those are just some fight suggestions that I would like to see for Conor McGregor going forward. There's probably going to be a lot of discussion about him coming into this week, at least through Wednesday, when the conversation should start changing towards UFC on Fox 12. But Conor wasn't the only individual who fought on Saturday. Gunnar Nelson continued winning at welterweight, and when he defeated Zach Cummings. So Gunnar's another one of those guys who has a good amount of hype about him. He isn't as talkative as his teammate in Conor McGregor, but he is proving to be just as good. Roy McDonald is one name that's been brought up about who Nelson should face next. Dana White had even made a comment about it, that's a good fight for him, only if Nelson is ready. I think this is a tough fight there because I would wonder how uh, Nelson would do on the feet against McDonald. McDonald's not someone who is a high volume striker, but he has one of those styles that kind of stops opponents from being really aggressive with him, and that's really the only way to kind of rattle his cage. You saw that that's what Robbie Lawler did when he defeated him. Uh, he was really aggressive with him, knocked him down a couple times, and then if you look back to when he fought Jake Ellenberger, another powerful striker, Roy was able to nullify his advances with his strikes. So how would Gunnar be able to set up his game is a big question there. On the floor, I think Nelson would be able to control much of the fight there, the same way Damian Maia did when he fought McDonald and almost took that fight if he would have been able to score a takedown in the third round. So I think that's a good direction to go with Nelson. I think it is because he's been getting a lot of hype for a good amount of time, and I think people believe he can be a contender at welterweight, but it's all just a matter of question of how he would do against some of those greater guys, some of the bigger name guys. And again, there's wrestlers in this weight class too that have shown that they have the ability to stifle good jiu-jitsu game. So that's another question that Nelson will have to answer going forward. But I think that the next good fight for him would be against Roy McDonald, or even against the winner of the Dong Young Kim Tyron Woodley fight that's coming up in UFC Macau. So there's a lot of good direction that you can take with him as well. The next the next individual I definitely would like to talk about is actually before I get to Norman Park, let's talk about Ian McCall, Brad Pickett. One of the most telling statements after this fight was when Ian McCall said that speed kills in the flyweight division. I think that's a exact way to describe this fight and why McCall may be the best fighter to face Demetrius Johnson next, and why Demetrius has been so dominant in the division, because speed definitely kills. Look at some of the guys who have been able to be a tough test for him. John Dotson, Joseph Benavidez the first time around, Ian McCall the first time around. They were able to match his pace and match his speed. If you can't do that, then you're in danger when fighting against uh, Mighty Mouse. That's why I'm looking forward to hopefully a fight being scheduled between John Lineker, who competed on Wednesday, and Ian McCall, with the winner of that fight getting a shot at Mighty Mouse if he defeats Chris Carriazo in the next few months. The reason being is because Lineker needs to be able to answer the call when it comes to dealing with that type of speed that Mighty Mouse has. Yeah, he hits hard, but can he keep that pace up for 25 minutes? Can he keep it up for three rounds? You know, we're going to talk about him later on in the show today, because he fought, like I said, he fought on Wednesday. So I think that that's somewhere we can go to as well. But that's just a question that I have there. But Ian McCall looked really good against Brad Pickett. I think he outclassed him from start to finish, and I wasn't too surprised with that outcome there. Again, I think McCall has kind of struggled at in the UFC to this point in time, so I would like to see him do a little better. I was high on him coming into the organization as well. So seeing him get a third shot at Mighty Mouse just off of this fight, I don't think is the right move. But I would definitely like to see him place against John Lineker at some point in time this year to kind of flesh out who's going to face off against Mighty Mouse next. The last guy who kind of caught my attention this past Saturday was Norman Park, and he looked really good in his fight. He almost had it stopped in the first round, but he got the job done in round two. So you want to know, what's next for him. I think he did a stellar job calling out Diego Sanchez. That's because Diego's a fighter that will kind of answer to those calls. He doesn't step away from any fight, and he's far enough out of the lightweight division where he can Norman can fight this guy, and he can kind of just grow from that position there. I don't think Diego is one of those guys, I don't think he's won many of his last couple fights, but he keeps getting the split decision nods just because he goes out there and throws haymakers for 15 minutes. So Norman may be shooting himself in the foot if he can't deal with that type of strategy, or even if he goes out there and fights a close fight, he'll still probably lose by split decision. It's sad that we got to say it that way, but that's just how things are going in mixed martial arts. So Norman Park did what he needed to do. He called out a big name, and we're just have to see what's next for him. So let's talk about one other topic that kind of caught my attention from UFC Fight Night Dublin, and that's the development of foreign stars, which I think the UFC is doing a strong job of at this point in time. So when the UFC, they're definitely trying to expand into new marketplaces, which is what they've been doing with guys like Conor McGregor, Dong Young Kim, their bevy of Brazilian stars, and like that's what they originally did with Michael Bisping in England. So looking at names such as Connor, such as you know Dong Young Kim again, I think that those Kung Lee as well, because he's headlining that Macau card. I think they're doing a good job of building up stars that can be developed in other countries. They have that UFC. There's going to be a tournament held in, I believe, China coming up next in 2015, that they're going to kind of change their Ultimate Fighter format out there because the reality show really didn't work too well. But they're doing what they need to do to develop these foreign stars. It's just unfortunate that a lot of these guys haven't been performing well to earn title shots, to earn belts, except for the Brazilian fighters. But even at this point in time, man, Jose Aldo's the only one we have left, and he faces a questionable position right now because he's hurt, and there's no direction really for what's next for him other than Chad Mendez. So we may find ourselves in a position where the UFC doesn't have any uh, Brazilian fighters as champions, or and the only one that would be a foreign competitor would be, in a sense, would be Cain Velasquez, and that's not necessarily true. That's just the way he's promoted as being a Mexican star. So as the organization continues to develop these athletes from other countries, it'll be interesting to see if these guys really can compete at the highest level. Right now, as I said, Connor's doing well. Dong Young Kim is doing great. I think Kun Lee's winning the fight that he needs to win. I don't think he sees himself as a eventual title challenger or contender, but he's still putting on the type of fights that can gain him even more attention than he's currently getting. So I'm looking forward to seeing what can be done next with these stars, who emerges as big names in the sport for the UFC outside of America, which is where a lot of the main talent seems to be coming from, and where the main talent seems to be training. One thing I think that would be interesting to see is that the UFC helps these guys get in with good camps like AKA Jackson or Rufus Sport. If they start kind of putting these guys that they think can be stars in foreign markets, start putting them in better gyms. Because one of the biggest struggles I think these guys have are finding top level talent in their home countries to challenge them while they're getting ready for some of these fights. That could be a great strategy on how to kind of get these guys more acclimated to the pressure of fighting in America and dealing with like just the limelight that comes with being a star at this point in time in the game. So that's my recap of UFC Fight Night Dublin. I think there was a lot of great moments. I think it was a good card. I personally enjoy UFC Fight Night Miller versus Cerrone a little more, but I still think this was it was a good event, especially for the Fight Pass offering, and I'm sure that the people who sat down and watched it definitely enjoyed it. It sounds like the people that were there enjoyed every bit of it, and I'm glad to see that this little bit of success set the UFC's way last weekend, this past Saturday.